So, thank you for coming. There's still spaces on the front. Come forward. Lots of space here on the front. So, welcome to Chicago. It's actually interesting. There's quite a few new faces compared to the last two events. So, I guess I may have to run through a little bit of logistics at the beginning. I'll try to make this relatively quick. Also, I feel a little bit like a teacher now because it looks like in a classroom where, you know, nobody's sitting in the front and everybody's sitting in the back. But hey. So for those who don't know me, my name is Lars Kurth. I'm the community manager of the Xen Project, and I happen to chair the Xen Project Advisory Board as well. A few logistics. So the event is basically on two levels. There's one meeting room here. There's another meeting room pretty much just above this. You go up a set of stairs, and then sort of on the left, there's the signage. We have lunch included. So lunch is on the ground floor, where basically where the reception is. You walk through the area of the lifts, and then on the left, that's the lunch area. Bring your pass, and that gets you in. We also have a drinks reception at the same place tonight as well, so that's in the schedule. So a big thank you to our sponsors, Citrix, Huawei, ARM, and Bates as well. We wouldn't be able to do events like this without sponsorship. So, you know, if you work for a cash-rich company, you know, and you guys can spare a little bit, just go talk to your manager and come to me. So, I kind of wanted to get a quick raise of hands. So, who has been at a summit since we started doing design sessions? And who has not? So about half. So I think I'm going to explain a little bit of how this works. So we have talks, you know, where people like me stand up and talk at you, and then we have design sessions. The design sessions are hosted in a separate system called designsessionsxenproject.org. A big thank you for George Dunlap, who has put that together for us. Basically, every attendee can submit a session, and you can all vote which sessions you want to attend. So once you registered, you will need a registration code. You can then create sessions, or you can rate sessions. And basically, you just choose, do you want to attend it, and if you want to attend, how important is it to you? And you rate all the sessions you want to attend on a given day. You may want to check once or twice during the event because there will be some new sessions. And then what we do is every day before the sessions start, we run a scheduler which tries to come up with the most optimal schedule. And then we will print out the schedule and hand it over to you. You can also, it will also be put in the online schedule. So for those who haven't run or participated in sessions yet, they're very hands-on. They're typically there to solve technical, process, design, or community problems. They're not presentations, but it's okay to show a few slides or, you know, or diagrams, whatever, during the sessions, but it's supposed to be interactive. There's going to be a session host. So this is the person who leads the session. If you haven't done this before and you want to do it, I'm quite happy to help one of you. So if you want to do that, you want to run a session and you feel a little bit uncomfortable, just come to me. And the session host will then also nominate a note taker because it's quite difficult to run a session and take notes at the same time. And typically the best way is to set up an Etherpad and then send me the information afterwards. And then you basically, the room configuration will be changed. It's going to be more interactive, sort of more of a circle in each room, and then we work together and solve the problem. And if we need things like whiteboards and stuff, that can all be arranged. So that's kind of all the logistics out of the way. Let me do my usual thing and give you a community roundup. So I wanted to sort of look at some of the big picture items which happened in the last half year, and then look at some of them in a little bit more detail. So actually, we had 2 birthdays last year. So the Xen Project actually turned 15. So we are, becoming slowly adults, I guess, still in a teenager phase. Unicraft, which was created 2 years ago, and you'll hear a little bit more about this tomorrow from Simon, has turned 2 and is actually building up momentum fairly fast. Some of the big development themes over the last few years are starting to come to a close, like PVH and QEMU debrief, and that really means what's going to happen next, right? So I don't have clear visibility around some of this yet, and I hope that maybe towards the end of the summit this will become a little bit clearer. Security issues, primarily side channel attack related and other hardware related stuff has remained a big theme, and probably will remain to be one in the foreseeable future, but we also had quite a number of software related vulnerabilities as well. And we're still dealing with some of the fallout. Another thing which is worth covering, and where I hope we're going to make some good progress on, and I'm going to cover some of this in a bit more detail, is around infrastructure, CI, and testing. So last year we basically agreed a rough and fairly ambitious plan, and we're actually making progress towards that. And you'll hear a little bit more about this from Doug, and I have to particularly thank Wei and Doug Goldstein to have driven this forward. I'm also going to cover a little bit on community and how we work. So we have some new community mechanisms where I want to increase participation a little bit, and we also had some discussions around things like best practice and so on. And there also has been some progress in automotive, embedded, and the safety space as well. So that's still fairly new. So that's kind of the big themes, and some of those I will go into in some more detail. So what are the big deals, the big themes I see coming? So this is my guess based on what I've seen, and some of it might be wrong. So I think one of the things which has kept on creeping up at the community call, as well as in other places, is we kind of need to create a roadmap, a sort of agreed roadmap more or less for the future. Because if we actually try and articulate that, maybe we can optimize, who looks at what, who reviews which series, and so on a little bit more. And we've also been trialing with some mechanisms around this in the community calls as well. This doesn't quite work yet, but I think it's worth having a discussion around that and see whether there's some common ground. Another thing which has come up, primarily through some of the security issues, both hardware and software, is we have a large number of areas where we have some technical debt, and also in some areas people want to contribute to it, and so then the question becomes how doable is an area where we have problems and we get more and more contributions. I think that might be worth discussing as well. But I'm not quite sure how much of a problem there is. So if you have problems along those lines, please come to me, and if there's a few people who have observed that, then maybe it's worthwhile to cover it, otherwise probably not. I think the other big theme, and there's quite a few sessions around this, are around a better development environment. This includes things like documentation, tools, CI testing, how we work together, and so on and so forth. And there's a number of design sessions in a pipeline for that already. One around, you can just moan at the build system and and see what we can improve there. The other one is how we actually look at our CI infrastructure and improve that. And also, we had a number of debates around how we work better together at the end of the day. And so I'm going to lead a session there as well. There's also been a sort of on-the-side project with a subset of the community which cares about safety, and there's going to be some sessions around this too, partly around initially defining the scope. What is the subset of Xen which you would actually want to work on from a safety perspective, and there's also some proposed sessions around tools which incidentally also might be beneficial for non-safety related contexts. And that's kind of the big themes as I see it. If there's any other things, please come to me and talk to me. So I wanted to highlight a few areas. So a lot of the big items which we've worked on for multiple years are coming to a close, either hopefully in the next release or in a release after, but it's not that we're spending the amount of effort we've spent on this in previous years. So PVH Domu is done with the exception of PCI Passthrough. PVH Domu 0 is primarily completed. There's some rough things around the edges before we can make it supported. The whole HVM PVH and PV-only hypervisor, which we started a couple of years ago, that's pretty much completed as well. And there's been quite a lot of work on QEMU deprivilege, and I think that has some rough edges as well, which need to be polished. But it's not really clear to me at this stage whether we have any new big themes along those lines, which run over multiple years coming up. So I think this is your chance to raise some of these and to actually also explain some of this stuff to me, so that I can explain it back to the board, and then we can also help promote some of this work, and also make sure that from a community perspective, everything ties together and works for you as contributors, developers, maintainers, committers, and users of the project. So one of the things I did want to look at in a little bit more detail is infrastructure. So probably most of you don't care about it, but we have a new website. The old one was really causing a lot of problems. And so we did this together with the Linux Foundation. That was a relatively straightforward process. A year ago at the summit, we agreed a vision for improving our CI infrastructure. And there's actually been significant progress in this area. But all of these things which happen are sort of unofficial bits of infrastructure, and we need to look at how can we fit that into our workflow and make everyone's life easier. So there's been a number of areas where there's been progress. So GitLab CI, I'll cover that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. We've been setting up instances around patch.u and patchwork, so this is going to be also hopefully a part of a better integrated overall story. And then we've been discussing this for nearly 2 years now, so we need some better coding standards tools, like we need to make check patch work, and we could never really make progress because there wasn't any out-of-the-box support for the idioms we have in our coding standards, in tools such as Clang Format. And EPAM, I believe, has added these, but they're not upstreamed yet, and this is blocked on people actually trying this to see whether we should upstream it and integrate it. So I hope we're going to make some progress in these areas in the next few days. I think we also had quality of service issues in OSS test. Primarily, we got caught out by things such as, Debian LTS release changes, and that sort of caused us a lot of problems. But I think the key point I have here is that we really need to address this. And right now, Ian Jackson, who maintains this on behalf of the community, is the only person really who works on this, and that's not going to be long-term sustainable. So we need more help, or we need to maybe look at doing this somewhat differently if it's maybe not the right thing. So that might be an area to discuss as well. So let us just remind us what we do today with regards to CI, right? So, somebody submits a patch to the list, then we get various reviewers reviewing this patch, and the patch series or patch collects all the X. And when that's done, it gets manually committed to Git staging by the committer. And then basically we have OSS test run over one or multiple of these patches. OSS test is quite resource intensive, so we can't test every single patch. And that basically picks this up and acts as a push gate. If everything goes fine, it gets automatically applied to master. If things goes wrong and there's multiple patches, the OSS test tries to identify the patch, sends a report back to the mailing list, and then basically a combination of the original submitter and the committer basically have to clean up the mess and revert that patch. And that's all not very ideal, and it creates a lot of manual, there's a lot of manual steps here, and I think I'm sure we can do this somehow better. And I'm sure everyone hopefully can benefit from it. So kind of what we wanted to do last year, and I'm not quite sure whether this is, I think this was what we were working towards last year, and plans can be changed, and maybe we can come up with something better. So I'm just kind of leaving this open, is somebody submits a patch. We already have a GitLab CI in place. So what that does, it basically takes a patch series or set of changes which individuals can push to the CI, and then it runs build tests on lots of different distros with different compiler versions, and at least both on x86 and on ARM, and on QEMU it also does some basic tests based on QEMU. So the idea would be then to have some sort of tool which takes the patch off the mailing list, creates a temporary Git tree, pumps that stuff into GitLab CI, and then, depending on whether the build tests or whatever we tie into this passes or fails, some sort of bot would basically, just reply to that series and say, well, it's been tested by our CI, and it passed or it failed. And then basically, if it passed, then the process, follows as normal, and if it failed, it goes back to the submitter of the change, and they just have to fix it and resend a new version. And then apart from that, everything would go as today. So where are we with this? I think we looked at almost all the pieces, and most of them seem to be in place from what I could see from various discussions. And I just noticed we do have a fire there's like a fire engine station just next to us, so that's why we're getting the noise a little bit. So there seems to be broad agreement that this is the right way to go. I guess we need to verify this. There was some discussion which came from Way, I think, looking at this in a little bit more detail, which means that maybe there's some impact on how we organize our trees. I'm not quite sure about that. There were some concerns about some details raised, and Doug also had a talk where he covers some of this in more detail. And really what I would like to see is, and there may be some gaps in some of the off-the-shelf components we're trying to plug together. Interestingly enough, if we had the capability to test patches off the list before they get integrated, we can also put other checking tools and hooks and so on into that. And I started thinking, oh, well, if we had some more meta information or something in a tree, like one of the other areas where we keep on often struggling with is things like, we change a piece of code and then the man pages or documentation doesn't get updated. Maybe there's some magic tool you could develop, which tells you that if you change this file, you should probably also look at this one or things like that. So this is just some ideas which I haven't really thought through yet much. I think another area which is worthwhile to communicate to you and to invite you to participate in is we have monthly community calls where we coordinate issues. They're on the first Thursday of each month at 15 hours UTC, so that's without any daylight savings adjustments. And there's a wiki for it, and I also have a sign-up sheet. So basically, normally what I do is a week before the call, I send a mail to the list, and I CC everyone on an email which signs up to the sign-up sheet. So if you want to participate, go to that webpage, add your email address to that sheet, and then you'll get notified when we have the calls. So the kind of things we discuss there are admin, project management related stuff. So for example, if somebody serious gets blocked, that person who submitted can raise it. And it's been working fairly well, not perfect, but fairly well. There's been a lot of information sharing as well around doing stuff around Xen, related projects and so on. There was a topic around improving developer docs as well. So Andrew Cooper kind of put something new there in place, which isn't quite there yet and still needs a little bit of discussion. And we also had discussions around how can we work better together, like do we need a code of conduct, do we need to be having infrastructure, do we need to be having some mechanisms in place to make the community more welcoming, stuff like that. There was also a proposal to, can we somehow track and more actively manage important series, but it wasn't quite clear what important means, right? To make sure that they go through the system more quickly. So that's another thing we could discuss as well, but we would have to try and agree on what these important series are at the end of the day. All right, so I'm running out of time, so I'm going to quickly cover automotive and safety as well. So there's been a bit of new functionality in this space. So tiny ARM configuration, which Stefano worked on. There's the initial set of patches around DOM zero-less. There's stuff around opt-t, possibly VirtIO, power management, which is all being worked on. So that's all kind of relatively straightforward and new functionality. So at the beginning of March, we had a 2-day workshop where we brought together people from the automotive industry, stakeholders in the Xen community, and to figure out whether it's actually technically feasible to safety certify a subset of Xen and how we could progress that. Before that, we experimented a little bit with Misra C, which failed horribly. We just ended up discussing for a very long time, but it was actually quite interesting for me because in many ways there's some lessons in there that you kind of have to approach some of the stuff in a very different way, and we all had very different conceptions of what Misra actually is and how you can, how much you have to actually comply with it and so on and so forth. But that's an entirely different topic. So at that workshop, we had a few community reps. I think we basically had all our committers there except for Jan and Ian, who was on vacation. We had vendors from ARM, from ARM, EPAN, individuals from ARM, EPAN, Renesas, and Xilinx. We even had quite senior people from Renesas attending, like Konishi-san, who's one of the board members of Automotive Grade Linux. We got quite a few safety assessors attending as well, and a few reps from who were just observing because they have an interest. So there was a lot of discussion around this, and we basically set up a regular group to try and put together a plan on how we can move forward, if that's indeed possible. So it looks possible, but at the end of the day, it's a question of resourcing and finding a compromise which works between those guys and the existing community. So I'm going to briefly skip over this because Artem, I think, is going to cover some of this in more detail. So I think the outcome in a nutshell was really that a small subset of Xen is actually safety certifiable. There would be some impacts on the community. It's not quite clear whether this, how we're going to approach this yet. And basically we're going to have some discussions around this at I think we have 2 or 3 design sessions in this area, and looking initially at the certification scope and some tooling which we could potentially integrate into this new CI loop. I think the agreement we had, what we really wanted to make sure that we minimize the impact on the upstream community and there's buy-in. And also, this will only really work if there's going to be significant investment from those vendors who want to do that in upstream. And any impact, for example, if we end up with lots of new documents which are needed for documents, tests, and stuff like that around a part of Xen, which would ultimately be needed for safety, that would have to be maintained by the community. That would increase the workload on existing maintainers. And so, just dumping this stuff and hoping that the existing maintainers maintain these kind of artifacts and things isn't gonna fly. So there has to be some sort of way how we ramp this up. So there's lots of question marks. It looks challenging. It's not impossible, and it's a sort of interesting problem. And we are not the only ones in the open source world who are looking at this. So that's my spiel for today. I have to apologize because I'm already making everyone late. So questions, quick questions, and then I guess the next speaker can just start coming down. No questions? All right. Well, find me on the floor afterwards if you do. Thank you.